Have you ever wondered if something can last forever? If everything that rises must eventually fall? Is capitalism doomed to the same fate? And what if, instead of being taken down by external forces, it is silently digging its own grave? Karl Marx prophesied that capitalism would bring about its own destruction because its logic of infinite expansion would make it unsustainable. Friedrich Nietzsche, on the other hand, might argue that capitalism is a reflection of human nature itself, our will to power converted into money and commodities. But what happens when this force grows so powerful that it can no longer be controlled? We live in a world where capitalism is not just an economic system, but a lens through which we perceive reality. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, wrote Mark Fisher. This phrase is not just wordplay. It describes what the philosopher called capitalist realism, the feeling that there is no viable alternative to the world we know. But what if we're wrong? What if capitalism itself is a machine accelerating toward its own destruction? Accelerationists believe exactly that the increasing speed of technology and the market will lead us to either inevitable collapse or a future beyond our imagination. The question is, what happens when a system that has always promised infinite growth starts reaching its limits? Will capitalism soon come to an end, or will it merely transform into something even more unrecognizable? Let's explore these questions and perhaps understand whether we are on the brink of a new world or the end of everything we know. Capitalism gives us the impression of being an indestructible system, an entity that adapts to any crisis, rising from the ashes stronger each time. From the very beginning, it has been this way. Wars, recessions, financial collapses, any of these should have been enough to bring it down, yet it merely changed form, absorbing shocks and reinventing itself. Does this mean it will never end, or is its resilience actually a symptom of a system that refuses to accept its own demise, artificially prolonging its existence? Mark Fisher argued that we live under capitalist realism, a kind of collective enchantment where the only possible reality is one governed by the market. With each new technological advancement, with every new economic cycle, we get the impression that there is no escape. Jean Baudrillard took it even further. For him, capitalism has not only become our reality, but has distorted it to such an extent that we now live in a simulacrum, an illusion of freedom, where everything is a commodity, including our own ideas and emotions. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time when other political and economic systems seemed viable, even inevitable. Feudalism, for example, dominated Europe for centuries, and to a medieval peasant, the idea of a world without lords and serfs was inconceivable. Yet, a series of social and technological transformations was enough to bring it down. Similarly, past empires that once seemed eternal collapsed under the weight of their own structures. The Roman Empire, believed to be indestructible, did not fall merely due to barbarian invasions, but because its economic and political system became unsustainable. What if capitalism is following the same path? If it was once a driver of progress, today it resembles more of a runaway car, accelerating out of control. Marx predicted that capitalism would collapse under its own internal contradictions. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, rampant exploitation, the commodification of everything. But perhaps it doesn't need to be overthrown by revolution. Perhaps it is destroying itself. Technology is one of the main drivers of this transformation. For centuries, capitalism has relied on human labor to expand. But now, we are getting closer to a world where automation and artificial intelligence will render a large portion of the workforce obsolete. What happens when capitalists themselves no longer need consumers because everything can be produced without human effort? Capitalism has always been based on the idea of scarcity. Something must be limited to have value, but technology is challenging this fundamental principle. In the novel Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, the colonizers of a distant planet assume the roles of gods, controlling access to technology to maintain inequality. But eventually someone rises against this system, trying to free the population from the illusion they live in. This leads us to a troubling question. Are we experiencing something similar? Could the financial and technological elite be controlling the narrative to maintain their position while the system heads toward inevitable collapse? If capitalism ends, what comes next? Can we even imagine a world without it? Or like the feudal lords before us, are we so deeply immersed in this reality that we cannot even conceive of its end? Perhaps the answer lies in acceleration, not in resisting capitalism, but in pushing it to its limits. If it is truly unbreakable, it should be able to withstand any speed. But what if at some point, acceleration becomes unsustainable? What happens when a system designed for infinite growth encounters a limit it cannot surpass? Capitalism has always been a growth machine. Since its rise, every technological revolution has only served to reinforce it, making it more efficient, more expansive, and faster. But what if this speed, instead of ensuring its survival, is what will lead to its collapse? There is a fundamental principle in physics. The faster something moves, the greater the force required to control it. Capitalism is becoming too fast to be governed, and this might be a problem even its greatest beneficiaries won't be able to solve. Nick Land, the philosopher of accelerationism, saw this with clarity. To him, capitalism is not just an economic system. It is an almost autonomous entity, an organism that evolves uncontrollably, driven by the logic of technology and the market. Land believed that the future no longer belongs to us. It belongs to artificial intelligence, digitized capital, and forces that no longer need humanity to operate. Artificial intelligence doesn't need a passport, he wrote, neither does capital. What does this mean? That capitalism may be slipping out of the hands of those who created it. Think about the speed at which technology advances. The first programmable computer emerged in the 1940s. Today, chips contain billions of transistors, and artificial intelligence is already beginning to surpass humans in various fields. Never before in history has change happened so quickly. What used to take centuries now happens in decades, sometimes even years. And capitalism, driven by the need for infinite growth, only accelerates this transformation. Accelerationism is based on a disturbing premise. If capitalism is destined to collapse, the best strategy is not to resist it, but to accelerate its logic to the breaking point. Marx suggested something similar when he said that capitalism creates its own contradictions, but accelerationism takes this idea to another level. Instead of waiting for the system to collapse naturally, why not push it even faster toward its final destination? This may sound like an apocalyptic thought, but in a way, it is already happening. The advancement of technology not only accelerates production and consumption, but also deepens inequalities. If capitalism once depended on workers to generate wealth, automation is making much of the workforce obsolete. If economic crises were once cyclical events, they now seem increasingly constant and unpredictable. Wealth concentration has reached unimaginable levels. While billions struggle to survive, a handful of individuals amass fortunes that surpass the GDP of entire nations. This extreme inequality can be seen as a symptom of the system approaching its limits. When an organism grows too large, it collapses under the weight of its own structure. Past empires fell because their expansions became unsustainable. What if capitalism is following the same path? The scariest part is that there is no plan. No one seems to be in control of this machine. Governments try to regulate the market, but they are constantly outpaced by the speed of technological innovation. Giant corporations dominate entire sectors of the economy, but even they are vulnerable to the forces of capitalism itself. In the end, we are all inside a vehicle accelerating toward the unknown. But who is behind the wheel? The answer may be unsettling, maybe no one. Capitalism, like an emergent intelligence, may have become a self-replicating system that grows on its own, without the need for a central command. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari described capitalism as a deterritorializing flow, something that spreads without borders, without limits, corroding everything in its path. If this is true, then there may be no way to stop it, but there may be a way to force it to reveal its destination. Acceleration might be the key to this revelation. If capitalism needs infinite growth to survive, what happens when it becomes too fast to sustain its own foundations? Technology may be its greatest ally, but also its greatest enemy. If the logic of absolute efficiency leads to a world where humans are disposable, where resources are extracted to the point of exhaustion, where inequality becomes unbearable, then acceleration may not be a choice. It may be an inevitable path to its own destruction. The remaining question is, when that moment comes, will we be ready for what comes next? If capitalism is accelerating toward its own end, the big question is, will that end be a catastrophic collapse or a transformation into something even more unpredictable? When a system collapses, two things can happen. Either it disappears, taking everything it sustains with it, or it radically transforms into something new. But can we even conceive of what might come after capitalism? Or are we so immersed in it that, like fish in water, we can't even imagine its absence? Here, accelerationist thought divides into two major camps. On one side, there are those who believe capitalism is driving us toward a post-capitalist future where technology will free humanity from labor, inequality, and material limitations. This vision echoes the ideas of Karl Marx, who believed that the advancement of productive forces would ultimately render capitalism obsolete. If technology can produce abundance, a system based on scarcity and competition would lose its reason to exist. We could enter a new era where human labor is minimized and society operates more cooperatively. But there is another side to the coin, a much darker one. Accelerationism can also be seen as a harbinger of the end of humanity as we know it. Nick Land and right-wing accelerationists do not believe in a utopian post-capitalist future. To them, capitalism and technology are inseparable, and acceleration will take us to a point where artificial intelligence and corporate power will completely replace humanity. The future does not belong to workers freed from oppression. It belongs to machines, to autonomous entities that will no longer need us. It is a scenario where capitalism continues to exist, but without humans at its center. A post-human world governed by algorithmic systems that self-regulate without any need for consciousness or ethics. This vision resembles what philosopher Gunther Anders called the obsolescence of humanity. To him, technological advancement creates a disparity between what we are capable of producing and what we are capable of understanding and controlling. The result is an alienated humanity, unable to make sense of the very world it has created. Capitalism may be digging its own grave, but it might be taking humanity with it. There is something profoundly nihilistic about this thought. In a world where technology can replace all human functions, where market logic overrides any sense of ethics or morality, what is the meaning of human existence? Are we heading toward a future where we will be mere spectators, powerless witnesses to the rise of a system that no longer needs us? Philosopher Franco Bifo Berardi suggests that we are trapped in a psychological deadlock. We know capitalism is unsustainable, that its acceleration may lead to disaster, yet we cannot imagine anything beyond it. We live in a state of paralysis where the only response seems to be to keep moving forward, even without knowing where we are going. This logic is reminiscent of an addict who knows their dependence is destroying their life but cannot stop because they see no alternative. But what if there is an alternative? What if acceleration is merely a symptom of something deeper? A problem not just economic or technological, but existential. After all, what do we truly want as a species? Do we want a world where technology liberates us, or one where it replaces us? Do we seek a future where capitalism transforms, or one where it finally comes to an end? Philosopher Slavoj Žižek suggests that instead of simply accepting acceleration as inevitable, we must radically rethink our own desires. If capitalism seems inescapable, it is because we are still trapped within its frameworks of thought. But history proves that no system lasts forever. Feudalism seemed eternal, until it wasn't. Empires have fallen, civilizations have collapsed, entire worlds have disappeared, and capitalism may be no exception. The question that remains is, are we prepared for what comes next? Or are we merely accelerating toward a future we do not understand? If capitalism is accelerating toward the unknown, if its logic of infinite growth threatens both its own existence and ours, what is left for us to do? Should we simply watch as it unravels? Or is there something that can be done to redirect this course? The first reaction to this scenario might be despair. If we are inside a vehicle with no brakes, heading toward an uncertain destination, perhaps there is nothing to do but wait for the impact. But this view ignores something fundamental. History has never been a linear and inevitable process. Revolutions have happened, worlds have changed. Capitalism itself did not emerge from nothing. It arose from a historical and cultural transformation that completely altered the rules of the game. If it could emerge, it can also disappear. The problem is that we don't know what a world without it would look like. And perhaps that is the system's greatest weapon, its ability to convince us that it is the only option. But is it really true that there are no alternatives? Mark Fisher used to say that before overthrowing any system, we must first imagine it as something that can end. As long as we remain trapped in the belief that capitalism is eternal, it will continue to exist, not by its own strength, but because we believe in it. Jean Baudrillard, in an even more radical way, suggested that capitalism does not need to be destroyed through a traditional revolution, but may simply exhaust itself, imploding under the weight of its own contradictions. If this is true, then acceleration is not just a risk, but an opportunity. If capitalism truly cannot be contained, perhaps we can use it against itself, pushing it until it exposes its own weaknesses. The very technology that seems to strengthen it today could be its Achilles heel. Artificial intelligence, automation, digital decentralization, all these forces could, ironically, undermine the foundation of capitalism, reducing the need for human labor, devaluing private property, and questioning the very logic of the market. But none of this happens automatically. Without reflection and conscious action, capitalism's collapse could lead us to something even worse, The problem is not just economic, it is also psychological. Gilles Deleuze argued that capitalism is not merely a system, but a mode of subjectivation. It shapes how we think, feel, and desire. It does not just govern our lives, it defines who we are. If we want a different future, the first step is to decolonize our own thinking. We need to learn to see beyond the categories imposed by the market. This means questioning the idea that infinite growth is synonymous with progress. It means challenging the notion that efficiency and productivity are the only criteria for measuring the value of things. Above all, it means accepting that the future can be radically different from the present, and that this can be a good thing. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." If we oppose capitalism merely by repeating its logic, seeking only to accelerate its destruction without thinking about what comes next, we risk falling into the same existential void that it imposes on us. True revolution is not just about destruction, it is about creating something new. What does this mean in practice? It means that before any global change, we need to change the way we think and live. Small gestures can have significant consequences: slowing down, rethinking consumption, valuing cooperation over competition, and cultivating ways of life that are not governed by the logic of profit. This does not mean rejecting technology or progress, but rather reclaiming them for something beyond the market. In the end, perhaps the most important question is not, when will capitalism end? But rather, what do we want to come after it? The future is not inevitable, it is being created right now by us, through our choices, through our ability to imagine something beyond what has been imposed on us. And the only certainty we have is this: either we find an alternative, or capitalism will find an end for all of us. If capitalism is an accelerated machine rushing toward the unknown, then the real question is not just when it will end, but what will be left when it's gone. Will we be mere spectators of an inevitable collapse, trapped in a system that drives us faster and faster toward an uncertain destination, or will we have the courage to imagine something new before it's too late? History has already shown us that no empire lasts forever. Feudalism seemed eternal until it vanished. The Roman Empire believed itself invincible, yet it succumbed to the weight of its own expansion. Capitalism itself was born out of the destruction of previous systems, and now perhaps it is approaching its own limit. As Walter Benjamin wrote, progress, which was meant to be our guardian angel, may very well be the angel of destruction. If the system collapses, it may take with it not only its inequalities and contradictions, but also the very foundations of society as we know it. Technology, which once promised us freedom and abundance, may well become the tool of our own obsolescence. And in the end, perhaps the greatest threat is not the end of capitalism, but the possibility that it will continue to exist without us. A system that no longer needs humans, only machines, algorithms, and self-regulating markets with no ethical or moral considerations. But that is not the only possibility. The end of capitalism does not have to be an apocalypse. It could be a transition to something better, something we have yet to fully conceive. The challenge then is not just to accelerate the collapse, but to think about what we want to come after. If we fail to imagine an alternative, then when the system crumbles, we will be dragged down with it. The philosopher Antonio Gramsci wrote that we live in times of crisis when the old world is dying but the new cannot yet be born. Perhaps we are in exactly that moment, a period of uncertainty where the future is being decided right now, through our actions, our choices, and our ability to think beyond what we have been taught. So the final question is not just whether capitalism will end, but who we will be when it does. If we want to survive this transition, we must begin building a new world before the old one collapses entirely. If you've made it this far, it's because this reflection touched you in some way. And that is the essence of philosophy: to question, to think beyond, to see what lies beneath the surface. What we're experiencing right now isn't just an economic or technological collapse, it's an existential crisis. The question, will capitalism end soon, is at its core a question about ourselves. What do we truly want for our future? And honestly, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe capitalism will come to an end, or will it simply evolve into something even more chaotic? Let me know in the comments. And if this video made you think, share it with someone who also needs to reflect on this. Oh, and of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and click the subscribe button, because the capitalist algorithm may be trying to control us, but for now, we still have some power over it. Now, the choice is yours. Will you speed up, or will you try to find an alternative path? And before you go, there are 2 videos on the screen right now. In one, we explore another idea that seems impossible to overcome, but might be reaching its breaking point. In the other, we discuss a philosophical question that could completely change your view of the world. Pick one and continue this journey See you in the next video.